There is a photograph that has been shared millions of times across every corner of the internet. Most people who see it for the first time assume it was staged. A warmly lit museum gallery. A princess mid-embrace with an elderly man in a volunteer lanyard. Both of them holding on with the kind of grip that does not come from politeness. It comes from history. From time. From the specific weight of a connection that was never supposed to resurface in quite this way, in quite this place, in front of quite this many cameras. Most people assume someone planned it. Someone always plans these things. Nobody planned this. What happened in the seconds before that photograph was taken, what no press officer anticipated, what no royal aide had written into any briefing document, what security personnel could only watch unfold with their earpieces in and their hands uncertain, is the kind of moment that does not come from a communication strategy. It does not come from a media consultant or a palace narrative team or a carefully timed leak to a friendly journalist. It comes from a person. From who they actually are, underneath the title, underneath the training, underneath every careful layer the world has spent years constructing around them. This is that story. And it is worth telling slowly. Princess Catherine, the Princess of Wales, is one of the most closely observed public figures alive. Not just watched, studied, analyzed, dissected. Every outfit is catalogued within minutes of her stepping out of a car. Every expression is frozen and zoomed and debated in comment sections by people who have spent more time examining her face than they have spent examining their own. She exists, whether she chose it or not, inside a machine that processes her every movement and converts it into content, into opinion, into narrative. And within that machine, she has learned to move with extraordinary precision. Every appearance she makes is the result of weeks of preparation by a team of professionals whose entire job is to ensure that nothing goes unexpectedly. Routes are mapped and walked in advance. Timelines are rehearsed until they feel natural. The number of handshakes, the duration of each conversation, the acceptable topics and the ones to gracefully sidestep, all of it is planned, refined, and communicated to everyone in her orbit before she sets foot in a single room. She is not careless. She has never been careless. She does not, under almost any circumstance, go off script. Which is exactly why what happened at the National Maritime Museum in Cornwall made the entire room stop breathing. The day had been running the way these days always run. Smooth. Controlled. Warm but precise. William and Catherine moved through the museum together, stopping at exhibits, speaking with staff, admiring artifacts with the particular brand of genuine interest that separates Catherine from many of her peers in this world. She has always been good at this. Not because it is performed but because it largely is not. She listens, she engages, she makes people feel, in a brief interaction, that they have been genuinely seen. Volunteers lined the gallery. Dozens of them. Ordinary people who had given their time to a museum they believed in, each one quietly hoping for a moment, a handshake, a kind word, a brief exchange they could carry home and describe to someone who would find it remarkable. Most of them would get exactly that. A warm hello. A gracious smile. The pleasant, slightly surreal experience of exchanging pleasantries with someone whose face you have seen on television for years. One of those volunteers was an older gentleman standing quietly near the back of the room. He was not positioned prominently. He was not wearing anything that distinguished him from the other volunteers around him. He held no title that would appear in any briefing document. No aide had flagged him. No schedule had allocated time for him. He was, to everyone in that building who carried a clipboard or an earpiece, simply a man in a lanyard. Unremarkable. Unscheduled. Background. And then Catherine saw him. Not in the peripheral, polite way you register a stranger across a crowded room. Not with the practiced warmth she extends to everyone in these settings. In the way you see someone from a chapter of your life that never fully closed. In the way recognition arrives not in your mind first but somewhere lower, somewhere older, somewhere that does not wait for your brain to catch up. Her body changed before she made a single conscious decision. The composed grace that is so characteristic of her, that quality of being fully present without ever being caught off guard, did not disappear. It was simply overtaken, replaced by something more honest and more urgent. Her eyes widened. Her face opened in a way that press photographers would later struggle to describe accurately because it was not a royal expression. It was a human one. And without consulting anyone, without glancing at her schedule, without a single look toward her security detail, she walked directly toward him. Her arms were already moving. She pulled him into a hug that had nothing polished about it. Not the formal two-cheek greeting of official occasions. Not the carefully judged warmth of a patron meeting a charity recipient. Full. Unguarded. The kind of embrace that communicates, without a single word, that this person matters to me and I am not interested right now in pretending otherwise. Security personnel exchanged glances. Staff members who had rehearsed every beat of this visit looked at one another in quiet alarm. The crowd went completely silent. Then, one by one, people started to cry. His name is Jim Embry. He is not famous. He does not have a verified social media account or a Wikipedia page or a seat at any table that the world considers important. Jim Embry is a retired schoolteacher. And on the afternoon that the Princess of Wales walked across a museum gallery and put her arms around him, he had come simply to volunteer. To give a few hours of his Saturday to an institution he cared about. He had no reason to expect anything more than that. The reason Catherine recognized him takes you back more than a quarter of a century. Back to a prep school in Pangbourne, Berkshire, called St. Andrews. Back to a classroom where a young girl named Kate Middleton sat with her uniform pressed and her books open, learning history from a man named Jim Embry. She was not yet a name the world knew. Not yet followed. Not yet photographed. The cameras that would eventually track her every step had not yet found her. She was simply a child. Curious, attentive, sitting somewhere near the window, in the particular way that children sit when a teacher is saying something that is quietly getting through. Whatever Jim Embry did in that classroom, however he taught, whatever energy he brought to the subject, whatever it felt like to be a student in his care, it did not simply pass through her and dissolve the way so much of childhood does. It stayed. Not as a nostalgic footnote. Not as a pleasant hazy memory of school. As something with roots. Because when Catherine held his arms in that museum gallery and him really looked at him, she did not offer something politely warm and quickly move on. She stayed in the moment. She let it be what it was. And then she said something to him that traveled around the entire world within hours. She told Jim Embry, "The things you taught me, I now teach to my children." Take a breath before you move past that sentence. Because inside those 11 words is something enormous. Jim Embry stood in front of a classroom in the early 1990s and did what teachers do. He showed up. He prepared his lessons. He tried to make something complicated feel alive for minds that were still learning how to care about things beyond their immediate world. He tried to hand young people a lens through which to understand the past and through it, themselves. He had no way of knowing whether it was working. Most teachers never do. The results of real teaching are almost never visible in the classroom where the teaching happens. They surface years later, in different rooms, in different voices, when an adult makes a choice or asks a question or sees the world in a particular way and cannot quite explain why. They surface quietly, without fanfare, in the texture of an ordinary life. Jim Embry's teaching surfaced in a museum in Cornwall with cameras rolling and the world watching. And it is surfacing right now, in the home where Prince George sits at a kitchen table and a mother explains something about the history of the island nation he will one day help to lead. It is surfacing in conversations Princess Charlotte has with her mother about why things happened the way they did. It is surfacing in the questions Prince Louis asks and the way his mother answers them, with the patience and the passion of someone who was taught by a person who genuinely loved the subject. Jim Embry taught one girl. That girl is teaching 3 children. One of those children will be king. The ripple from a single classroom in a school in Berkshire, more than 25 years ago, is still moving. It has not stopped. It is shaping the future of the British monarchy. And until that afternoon in Cornwall, Jim Embry had absolutely no idea. That is the part of this story that does something complicated to your chest. We talk about teachers constantly in our culture. We put quotes about them on coffee mugs. We dedicate 1 week a year to appreciating them. We nod along when someone says they are underpaid and undervalued, and then we go back to whatever we were doing. But we rarely stop long enough to actually reckon with the weight of what a single teacher can carry into the future without ever knowing it. Jim Embry was not exceptional in the way that the word exceptional usually gets used. He was not a headline teacher. He was not famous within his profession. He stood in front of a classroom and did his job with what we can only assume, based on the evidence of this day, was genuine dedication. He cared. He probably had good days and difficult ones. He probably marked hundreds of papers that felt like they mattered and wondered sometimes whether any of it was really landing. Whether the students filing out at the end of each lesson were carrying anything with them or leaving it all behind in the room. It was landing. It was landing so deeply in one particular student that 26 years later she crossed a gallery floor and held onto him like she was making up for lost time. Like she had been waiting for the chance to say what she said without ever quite knowing when the chance would come. Most teachers never get that moment. Most of the people who quietly shape us move through their entire lives without knowing the weight of what they gave. They retire. They live their quiet lives. They carry the unanswered question of whether it mattered, whether it reached anyone, whether the work was worth the effort of doing it well. Jim Embry got his answer. Catherine gave it to him. In public, in the most visible way imaginable. In front of every camera and every person in that room and every person who would see the footage within the next 48 hours. She gave him the thing that most teachers never receive and that all of them deserve. After the visit, journalists found him. The internet was already moving at full speed. Footage and photographs had spread globally within hours, and reporters wanted the story from the man at the center of it. Jim Embry spoke the way genuinely decent people tend to speak when the world suddenly turns its attention on them. Without performance. Without inflation. He said simply that Catherine had not changed at all. That she was just as kind and warm today as she had been 25 years ago in that classroom in Berkshire. No fanfare in those words. No attempt to insert himself into the story in any way that was larger than the truth. Just a quiet observation from a man who had known a girl before the world decided she was remarkable, and who recognized in the woman he embraced that afternoon exactly the child he remembered teaching. Consider what it means that she had not changed. Consider the distance between that classroom in Pangbourne and that gallery in Cornwall. Consider everything that happened in between. The university years. The courtship. The wedding that a billion people watched. The relentless public scrutiny. The tabloid campaigns. The years of having every decision, every appearance, every expression picked apart by people who had never spent a single minute in her position. The pregnancies. The grief, the cancer diagnosis that she announced with a composure that left the world momentarily speechless. The slow, careful return to public life afterward. Through all of it, according to the man who knew her before any of it began, she remained exactly herself. That is not something you stumble into. That is character. That is the result of knowing who you are at a level that the world's opinion of you cannot easily reach. And perhaps part of knowing who she is comes from the people who knew her first. The people who saw her before she was Catherine, Princess of Wales, before she was Kate Middleton, future Queen, when she was simply a girl in a uniform trying to understand the world. Jim Embry is one of those people. And she carried him with her. The protocol she broke that afternoon was not insignificant. Royal protocol exists for reasons that go beyond simple tradition. It maintains order in unpredictable public spaces. It protects the people within it. It manages the enormous complexity of placing a highly public figure in front of large crowds with cameras and competing interests. When Catherine stepped away from the schedule and moved through the crowd toward Jim Embry, she was not being reckless. But she was making a choice. A conscious, instantaneous, deeply human choice. She chose him over the plan. And in that choice, she communicated something that no carefully drafted speech could ever quite deliver. She communicated that people are not background. That the quiet figures from the earlier chapters of your life do not become irrelevant simply because your own chapter became extraordinary. That gratitude is not something you feel privately and leave unexpressed because the moment is inconvenient. That a man who gave you something worth keeping deserves to know it, even if the knowing happens in a museum gallery with 100 people watching and a schedule falling apart behind you. That is why the footage moved through the internet the way it did. Not because it was unusual for Catherine to be warm. She has always been warm. But because warmth at that level, that spontaneous and that complete, in a context engineered specifically to prevent spontaneity, is so rare that when people encounter it they feel it before they understand it. It does not arrive in the mind first. It arrives in the body. In the throat, behind the eyes. It arrived that way because it was real. Because you cannot manufacture the specific quality of that hug. You cannot train someone to walk across a room that way. It either comes from genuine feeling or it does not come at all. This came from genuine feeling. And people sensed it immediately, the way people always sense truth when they are given enough space to encounter it. There is a version of this afternoon where Catherine noticed Jim Embry across the room, felt something stir in her memory, and kept walking. Nobody would have known. The moment would have passed like thousands of other almost moments pass in the course of a managed public life. Jim Embry would have driven home with a quiet story about how close he had been, without her ever knowing. And he would have continued not knowing what his teaching had carried forward into the world. That is not the version that happened. The version that happened is now part of the public record. Not because anyone orchestrated it. Because a woman saw someone who mattered to her, in a room full of people, and did not pretend otherwise. Jim Embry shaped a queen. Not with ambition or strategy or any awareness of what he was doing. He shaped her the way good teachers shape people, quietly, steadily, by caring about the subject and the students in front of him and trusting that the caring would land somewhere worth landing. It landed. It is still landing. And somewhere out there right now, in schools that will never make headlines, in classrooms that will never appear in any documentary, there are teachers doing exactly what Jim Embry did. Showing up. Caring. Handing young minds something worth keeping and having no idea what those minds will eventually do with it. This is for them. And this is for every person watching who has their own Jim Embry. Someone from a chapter of your life who gave you something you are still carrying. Someone who shaped the way you see the world without ever knowing the full weight of what they left behind. Do not wait 26 years. Do not wait for a museum in Cornwall. Tell them now. While you still can. While they are still there to hear it. That is the lesson Catherine taught the world on that afternoon in Cornwall. Not through a speech. Not through a policy initiative. Through 11 words spoken to a retired teacher in a volunteer lanyard, holding on, in a gallery gone completely quiet. The things you taught me, I now teach to my children. Some things are worth breaking the schedule for. He was one of them.